Buongiorno Venezia, benvenuti alla Masterclass con Nicolas Refn. Questa Masterclass è dedicata a un regista, un cineasta che era anche un grande amico, che si chiama Ruggero Deodato, che è scomparso a dicembre, e vorrei gentilmente un grande applauso da parte vostra. Ruggero è stato considerato per anni un regista di genere. Ecco, io ho sempre fatto fatica a capire cos'è un regista di genere, cos'è un autore e cos'è un cineasta. Per me esistono solamente due tipi di registi, quelli che lasciano una traccia nella storia del cinema e quelli che non la lasciano. Ecco, Ruggero Deodato sicuramente ha lasciato una grande impronta nel cinema non solo italiano ma anche mondiale, per tutto quello che poi è derivato anche con la politica del found footage e quant'altro. Qui a Venezia presentiamo uno dei suoi film più oscuri, che è Ultimo mondo cannibale, il primo film della trilogia dei cannibali diretto appunto da Ruggero Deodato nel 1974, no, 77, perché 76 era Uomini si nasce, poliziotti si muore. Un film che è stato girato in situazioni a dire difficoltose, a dire poco, in mezzo alla giungla vera, con una troupe ridotta, con un giovane Lamberto Bava che faceva l'aiuto regista e che è stato morso addirittura da un serpente durante le riprese. Fortunatamente avevano tolto il veleno e Lamberto Bava ha potuto fare Demoni e altri grandi capolavori del nostro cinema dell'orrore che ben conosciamo. Nicolas, volevo farti la prima domanda chiedendoti, tutti conoscono, penso, Cannibal Holocaust, che è il film di Ruggero Deodato più celebrato. Eppure Ruggero mi ha sempre detto che il suo film preferito è Ultimo mondo cannibale, perché è un film che lui comunque ha scritto basandosi su fatti reali, letti su National Geographic. Che cosa ti ha colpito del film e che cosa ti colpisce del cinema di Ruggero Deodato in generale?
I think that obviously Italy has so many things to love, and one thing is the filmmakers. I think that people like Ruggero Deodato and that generation of artists were very much pioneers, but they were also political and artistic. And what's interesting about cinema in that period globally was that that was cinema. I mean, you went to see movies and you could go to a multiplex and see a Bergman film or a Deodato movie or some other American film. You know, there wasn't this kind of obsession with commercializing or defining. It was just cinema, it was film. And a lot of us still live on that mythology in a certain way. So when my good friend Manuel called me about they had found a negative for this film, if I would present it and talk a little bit about the film. It's a pretty extreme movie, but it's also a unique movie because the first thing you'll be saying if you come to the screening tonight is like, they'll never make a movie like that again. So there's something in a way historical, almost like a museum piece about it. But obviously you can see, I'm sure, a lot of references to future films as well in his work. But I find him incredibly fascinating as a filmmaker. The same way like Dario Argento and some of the other, Mario Bava and all those other, we named them many times.
Tu hai spesso detto che quello che ti piaceva dei film hai spesso detto che quello che ti piaceva dei film in generale, anche di questo tipo di film anni 70 italiani, non era tanto importante il contenuto, ma proprio l'aspetto visuale, la libertà che questi registi avevano di poter creare qualcosa che non esisteva anche in maniera totalmente incosciente. Pensiamo a un film anche come Cannibal Holocaust, tutta l'idea del found footage, che all'epoca non si chiamava found footage, che molti anni dopo, da Blair Witch Project in avanti, Paranormal Activity, tutti i film che sono derivati da questo, hanno un riscontro con Cannibal Holocaust, quindi questa libertà di esprimersi inventando cose anche senza avere forse la coscienza di quello che stavano inventando.
Well, you can kind of say that as a filmmaker, you're really just supposed to make films you want to see, because that at least is something you can relate to. I don't know what that says about Ruggero Deodato's mind, but you know, there is a you know, it's in a way you can say a lot of these filmmakers maybe wouldn't be making films nowadays if they were younger and born. They would maybe use social media, they would use gaming, they would use other technologically inventions that in a way has surpassed traditional cinema, you know. And I find that very fascinating, and because it's an incredibly creative space to be in. I would say, so looking at a film like Ruggero's work, there is both a political conscience, there's also an adventurous classic, you know, 90-minute action film, but there's also intelligence and extreme and poetry and great music and all the things that we need. But, you know, it's what we all struggle with nowadays, because we are so controlled by the system that it's very hard to create an independent voice or to stay true to what you want to make, because there's so many sacrifices. You know, we adapt to our surroundings, and I think that in a similar way, his second film, Cannibal Holocaust, right, is in a way a product that would be social media today. That would be a TikTok film. And I find that fascinating, that the inventions that we all live by have already been made, you know, many years ago. And that, I think, can be a very inspiring look at things. And rather than trying to retain the past, it's really about understanding what the future is. And I always believe to look at the future, you need to know your past. You know, I mean, no rock musician wasn't famous if they didn't have a record collection of 1,000 records. I mean, we are all product of our inspirations, one way or another. Even though people claim they're not, they're obviously lying.
Trovo molto interessante quello che hai detto, appunto, conoscere il passato per reinventare il futuro. Questo per un regista come te, che è un artista fondamentalmente, quello che ti ha ispirato. Non so, penso a un film come Neon Demon. In Neon Demon c'è qualcosa di Suspiria, ma non è una copia di Suspiria, cioè non è ripetere, fare remake, che oggi a Hollywood sembra essere la moda più importante, è reinventare i film assorbendo quelle immagini che ti hanno colpito. Dico giù bene?
You know, absolutely. You know, we are. I mean, we are product of our upbringing. You know, and certainly at a certain age, you know, we gravitate towards things, and that could be on many different levels. I mean, I grew up in New York, Manhattan, and my mother and stepfather were Scandinavian socialists who thought that Scandinavia and Sweden and Denmark was the only way of living in New York and peace on earth. And they hated Ronald Reagan and American violent films. Well, guess what I loved growing up? I loved Ronald Reagan and violent films because that was the only way to piss off my mother. So, you know, searching for the rebellious attitude, you know, and obviously taking a movie like Suspiria, which made a huge impression on me, and I remember, I think I even watched it with my mother on VHS because she was very curious what I was looking at, and she was horrified, which made it even better, I will say. And then obviously, you know, these elements stick with you, and they kind of become your brushes in a certain way. Now it's your time to put your own colors on it. I haven't used as much cocaine as Dario did, but and maybe that's a good thing, because I always said Suspiria is like the ultimate cocaine movie. It's like he hadn't slept for I don't know how many months, and then his dealer stopped calling. He's like, oh fuck it, let's just stop the movie then, you know. And that was.
Hai detto che appunto hai detto appunto che sei cresciuto a New York, ma il tuo primo incontro col cinema, in realtà il tuo primo incontro con le immagini è stato attraverso la televisione. Non eri il ragazzo che andava sulla 42esima strada a vedere i film all'epoca. Quanto ti ha influenzato la televisione? Che cosa ti ha aperto poi nel tuo modo di fare cinema? Qual è stato il primo incontro appunto con l'immagine?
I mean, I love television. I gotta hand it. When we came from Denmark in '78, and it was like one channel, and there was like nothing on it. And coming to New York as 8-year-old, I'm very dyslexic, so obviously I gravitated towards the image, and I couldn't speak English. And seeing this incredibly invention that you could click on, and it had different images and sounds, I thought, this is heaven. This is like, if I could marry this thing, I would marry it. And I've always loved screens ever since. I've always loved television. It's a thing that is more powerful than cinema because it's so ingrained in everything we do, and it's obviously the canvas of the future and has proven to be. Cinema and going to the movies was not something I was born into, but growing up as a teenager in New York, there were great movie houses to go and see films in, and my mother forced me to go see certain movies, like, I think we saw Hard Day's Night, that was a good film. But other things like, you know, 400 Blows or things like that. But I've always loved television, so I've always been fascinated by the power of the screen, and certainly how that's now become our main transportation through culture is the screen. So, you know, all the power to it. I also find it very dangerous and all those things, but I've always loved television, and I think that was my introduction to film. And more the idea of controlling the image, like a conceptual point that you can control the switch from one image to another image, whether it's a commercial or a piece of narrative, it didn't really matter, but you could control the flow of images. And I think that was my kind of introduction to the idea that film was, or storytelling could be interesting. And then I went to see a film called The Texas Chainsaw Massacre at Cinema Village in New York, which is still there. And that's when I realized that what I wanted to do, I didn't want to make that movie because it's a very horrifying film, but I wanted to do what that movie could do. And that was like painting. And I couldn't paint because I'm colorblind, so that didn't give me an option. It was a piece of music. Well, I have no musical skills, it's not really a written movie, and I'm very dyslexic, so I'm not particularly good at that either. But the idea of composing emotions was very, very interesting to me, that I could use my emotions to extract a canvas, and I could use cinema, the projection of something, as a place to do what I ended up essentially doing. And it was also the time in New York where fame became a real kind of idea of being famous, you know, post Andy Warhol's famous declaration. And, you know, I was very much part of that, you know, youth culture of exhibitionism and what you actually have to absorb to become, you know, I guess an artist. You have to have the megalomania, and you have to be self-obsessed beyond belief, and you have to be really, you know, up your own ass. But that is what is to create, but it's also the exhibitionism of wanting to take your clothes off to say, this is so important, everyone else needs to see it. And that was an interesting time in New York, because that was very much celebrated as a youth culture. So I was very much a product of that experience at that time. I'm a product of the American dream.
Parlando proprio di Texas Chainsaw Massacre, tu l'altra sera mi hai detto una cosa molto interessante, che per capire, dal tuo punto di vista, un certo tipo di cinema americano classico, la doppia proiezione che ogni spettatore dovrebbe fare, uno dopo l'altro, è Texas Chainsaw Massacre con Wonderful Life di Frank Capra. Spiegaci questo binomio e come può raccontare il cinema americano secondo te.
Well, you can kind of say what's interesting about, I don't know if it is filmmakers here, but It's a Wonderful Life is like, you can kind of say the perfect American film. It's perfectly written, it's perfectly acted, it's perfectly directed, it's perfect performed in terms of story and thematics, and it's about being good and you cry at the end because you're happy. It's like the perfect film. And there was probably never better made film in a sense of perfection. And then you can say, then for me, then came obviously the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because that is the exact opposite of everything that's perfect. It's completely, it's very its own self. It doesn't have anything it doesn't have sexuality, the acting is non-existing, it doesn't have any meaning, it doesn't have a purpose except to create. And I always say, for my own, it was like watching A Wonderful Life and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and then my life really changed again when Elle Fanning showed me how to set up my Instagram account. And I was like, that is my trilogy. It's like myself growing up with things on television which was wholesome and correct and certainly all American, to suddenly having this beast of complete, destroying what is good taste, but also experiencing, what people would have probably had when they saw the Ramones for the first time or Sex Pistols, to then really waiting for so long and then sitting in Paris with a 18-year-old girl who tells me about Instagram, and she opens up my account. I was like, fuck, man, this is it.
Can drink.
Yeah. Please talk amongst yourselves.
Tu hai presentato Texas Chainsaw Massacre in Cannes, alla Cannes. È stato uno dei primi film che tu hai presentato e quindi hai supportato per riportarlo alla luce. In quell'occasione hai conosciuto Tobe Hooper, un altro grande regista di quel periodo che è scomparso. Com'è stato il tuo incontro con Tobe Hooper?
Depressing. I mean, I've had opportunities to support filmmakers that I think are important, or their films are, and I enjoy that, preservation and also making as much noise or maybe helping a new generation to experience at least what I like. It's kind of what we all do in a way. But I was in Cannes, and they asked if I would introduce the movie on stage, which was, of course, very proud to do. And Tobe Hooper came, and he was, a special type of person. And I'm just happy I'm sitting here and not there. Let me put it like that.
Un'altra caratteristica tua, tu sei un grande collezionista, hai fatto un bellissimo libro di poster, collezioni tantissimi negativi, pellicole. Da dove arriva questa passione e cosa ti ha spinto a diventare questo Indiana Jones del cinema perduto?
Well, I've always loved collecting. I have this thing, and I've collected most things, and I usually lose interest. I like to search for things that can inspire me, and sometimes going into the past or into the obscure, you sometimes find a piece of thing that maybe gives you the drug you need to go and make something new. I also think the sadness of filmmakers who have made films that are lost, would be the worst thing for anyone. So I take it upon myself to like many other filmmakers, like Martin Scorsese, and I also believe Wes Anderson supports, a lot of old movies or restorations and saving of cinema. I mean, we have to in a certain way.
E dove li trovi? Come funziona questa ricerca? Dove trovi questi film? Dove scopri questi tesori?
I have people who work for me around the world who all they do is go around in old factories or apartment buildings or old cinemas and try to find things. And then there was a filmmaker that was about to be completely forgotten called Radley Metzger, who was a very interesting filmmaker who was kind of the erotic master of sexy cinema out of New York. And his whole film archive, all his negatives were sitting in a storage. And a person who works for me got a phone call saying if the storage fee is not paid, then all this is going to be thrown out. So technically, if Peter Conheim, who works for me, hadn't gone to New York and paid the fee of $500, a filmmaker, and a very important filmmaker, I think, his whole archive, all his negatives, his material, his work would have been thrown out and lost forever.
Radley Metzger sicuramente uno dei registi americani più curiosi, un regista che ha lavorato anche molto in Europa, ha iniziato importando film d'autore anche in America e ha avuto questa capacità di attraversare un po' tutti i generi senza pudore, passando dall'horror. Teresa and Isabel è stato presentato qui a Venezia l'anno scorso, restaurato da te, ha fatto anche film porno. Come lo descriveresti come regista Radley Metzger?
Describe him as a director.
Well, he's unique, I guess. I mean, Radley Metzger kind of invented, sophisticated erotic cinema, and obviously went on and did the famous pornography films and so forth. But he's a kind of a great presentation of an era of cinema that was very progressive. It was when it was moving from, violence at that time had kind of played out its cards. Everything had been shown. And so sex was always, in a way, the great taboo. And he was one of probably the most successful in breaking down the barrier between, narrative and sex in film. And kind of perfected that art form in a certain way. So there's also something very important for all of us to remember that there were people that what we take for granted, there were a lot of people that really worked hard to get there, and so I thought it was important to obviously support and protect Radley's legacy as much as I can.
E tu hai riscoperto anche un altro regista molto importante, Curtis Harrington, che ha fatto un film strepitoso che grazie a te è stato riportato alla luce, Night Tide.
Which one?
Night Tide.
Oh, Night Tide, yeah. Well, Night Tide was an interesting, I don't know if you've ever seen this film. It actually premiered at Venice many years ago. It's an incredible film. It's a great Hollywood movie, actually. The negative was so destroyed that it was considered written off. And I tracked down the owner of the negative, and I paid him $10,000 for it. And then I got the negative, and it was completely destroyed, or the people who worked for me got it. And it was considered that this film would never be saved. It was just like a dying patient on a table. And so I'd known Curtis a little bit before he passed away, and he was a very sweet man, and this film was very important to him. So I sent the thing to France, thank God for the French, and they spent a year in Paris restoring the negative, and we were able to create a new negative through a digital revolution. So in a way, you can say digitalization has also been a tool to help us protect our legacy of certainly film and other mediums that we need to make, that we need to have in terms of going into the future.
E invece Andy Milligan, che è un altro regista.
Well, there's so many of them. I mean, there's Andy Milligan, who was a New York filmmaker who also, you know, who you shouldn't know because no one knows him, but his films were very personal. We were able to find that and preserve that. So, you know, it's just, you know, well, other people do it for me, but I sign the checks.
Ma tu sei affascinato da il cinema americano più oscuro. Tu vuoi andare a riscoprire cose che penso nessun altro al mondo ha mai visto, posso dire? Cioè c'è il caso ad esempio del libro che hai fatto, The Exotic One, la storia di questa cinematografia familiare è assurda, ce la vuoi raccontare?
Cinematography is rather absurd. Can you tell us about this?
Well, there was America is very interesting when it comes to pop culture because it has a lot of regional elements. You know, you have it in music, you have it in literature, and you have it in movies where things were made at such regional level that they never went to the mainstream and just stayed there. And through someone who worked for me called Jimmy McDonough, there was a story about the Ormond family, which was a family of pioneers, a husband and wife and a son, who would make these very peculiar films in the South and in America, down around like the south of the country. And they would go by plane and collect the money from the drive-ins. And then they had a near-death experience and decided to become evangelists and make propaganda films for the church, these very hardcore American Baptists, and they took the exploitation sensibility and moved it into religion, which is a great way of America, because America is all about sex and religion. So again, the material was completely unknown and no one's ever heard of it, and we were able to track it down, and I was able to collect and buy everything out of these various places.
Il tuo essere artista, il tuo essere creativo, ovviamente tutti abbiamo visto i tuoi film e sappiamo che cosa significa, ma un altro aspetto della tua creatività è rappresentato dalla piattaforma che hai creato, by NLWR, che inizialmente era nata come un museo, era un sito veramente complicato nel quale muoversi, era una sorta di magazine però online, ma non come siamo abituati, ti potevi muovere in tantissime stanze e scoprire ogni volta un percorso diverso dal quale era poi difficile tornare indietro, ma era appunto un'esperienza artistica. Il sito, la platform è poi maturata nel tempo e sta diventando qualcosa di molto importante, mi sembra di capire, anche un modo di esprimere contenuti in totale libertà. Ci racconti della tua platform, della tua personale platform?
Well, I think that every artist wants freedom. I think that's all we fight for, is to make the things we want to make. And that's the only thing we can do. When I was 24, I was able to meet Eli Kazan, you know, the great American film director, at a dinner in Stockholm. And he was very old, and he was sitting at another table with a few people, and I was sitting at another table with a lot of people, and I was like, why I should be sitting over there? So I kind of gate crashed my way into sitting next to him, and I asked him, what advice would you give a young filmmaker? I had just done my first film, and he said, my advice is do it your way. So that means freedom. And that's basically what we all long for, and finding that balance. And I think because of technology and why technology is so brilliant and such, you know, I would wish I could live another 100 years to see how the world would turn. But technology has given us this ability to obviously interact with people directly. And that has been the big game changer. Obviously, music had it, literature had it, painting has it, but film is starting now to become an ability to create content or create films or create art, whatever you want to call it, but communicate directly with people that would appreciate or can relate to what you want to do. And that's what social media has essentially transformed into. And it's, you know, from the beginning of the internet to where it is now. And a few years ago when I started the platform, it was more of a museum. But the idea was to be at one point, one day, become, well, when I begin to make films at a certain point in my life, I would like to make films without anything other than direct access to the people that would want to see it. And that is what technology has allowed. So I spent a whole year building technology inside the platform that would give me this sense of creating and directly giving it to the consumer or the audience or the people who want to see it without all the other interactions. So if you want to see something, then I can give it to you, and we don't have to have any middle people telling us what to do or what to think. That is probably one of the biggest game changers that will become in mass media, this ability to basically fund and therefore have direct access and make things as free as possible. You know, I tried the taste of it last year with Prada, where I made a film with them that was completely free. You know, that I could do whatever I wanted, and I didn't have a pressure of delivering anything other than just what I would like to see. And Prada was very supportive in allowing me to do that. And once I realized that that is really what is doable nowadays with technology, then that would become my next stage. So you can kind of say, going from my Instagram experience, it's now into creating art directly and communicating directly in cinema, which, you know, in a way I think will change a lot of things, especially nowadays when streaming is so overfunded and so overrun with money and cocaine that it's kind of saturated everything and almost devalued content to just a swipe. And that's incredibly sad and terrifying, because art is essentially the only thing besides, you know, sex, water, and happiness that makes us exist. And the AI, which is doing a lot of the work nowadays, and it's certainly something affecting our industry, AI is not an artist. AI is a product, but an artist creates, and artists create content or material that we relate to emotionally, and that's what makes us humans. And we have to preserve and protect that at all costs, which is difficult when everything just comes down to money or stock market or, you know, inflated numbers, or just the idea of wasting time. I mean, time is so precious, you know. I mean, I'm a 52-year-old man. I'm lucky to make it to 75, you know, that I'm in a percentage. We have to remember that time is so precise, the balance of our human existence. Like, time is something you take and give. You're never going to give it back. So if I am to give you something and you are to watch it, I respect you by giving something that is me, and that at least is my interaction. But I have to give you something that means something. Otherwise, your time is stolen, and then you never get that back. And think of how sad that is, that we spend so much time on wasting time and not on gaining time. And I think that's why, in a way, cinema, even though I projected it dead a few years ago, which it certainly has changed into, is something we have to fight for. And the theatrical and the movies and all those things, they're part of what makes us human and experiencing creativity. Any questions?
Wait. For the mic.
My name is Rao Rampila. I'm a New Yorker from Manhattan. Now I'm an actor, so we are under strike, especially with the AI. What do you think of that? My second question is, I have a theory. As an actor, I see all these movies, and there are certain characters, some people you want to see over and over again. Is it correct if I say either the camera likes you or doesn't like you? It likes you, you're in. It doesn't like you, you're out. Of course, there is a Stanislavski technique and all those stuff. I limit to these two questions. I appreciate us.
Well, I guess starting with the second question is more like, yes, there are people who have it, and there are people who don't have it. And it's called a movie star. And it's just, you can't teach it, you can't fake it, it's something you're born with. And I've been very fortunate to work with actors that have that aura. And it's just a unique thing. And it's God, that gives it, and no one else. And about the strike, I think that one of the biggest challenges that we have in the world is the inequality that we all suffer from. I think that the idea that the 1% controls 90% is wrong. I think that, like all unions in the US and around the world, are struggling with this very issue. And obviously I stand behind anyone that, believes that sharing is better than owning. And so I would certainly, keep on fighting. And I'm part of the WGA union, and I would say the same thing there. Now, the fighting is going to be challenging because it's not just money, it's a whole philosophical approach to what it is, who we are, and what a union actually means, and also what technology does. And we just have to remember that, again, the more happier that people are, the better the world is.
Qui davanti, ragazza con gli occhiali.
Valentina D'Amico, io volevo tornare un attimo a Ruggero e Deodato, visto che prima parlavi oggi, molti suoi film sarebbero su TikTok. Mi veniva in mente, a parte i suoi numerosi problemi con la censura, sia Ultimo Mondo Cannibale che soprattutto Cannibal Holocaust, parte di questi problemi che lo hanno portato anche in tribunale sono stati legati a questa guerriglia marketing che si era inventato, questa prima forma di found footage in cui aveva chiesto agli attori del film di non farsi vedere per un po' di tempo per far credere che fossero scomparsi realmente. Quindi ero curiosa di sapere se anche tu hai avuto problemi con la censura, cosa ne pensi di queste forme alternative per creare curiosità intorno all'opera.
I've never really had too much problem with censorships. Certain countries have like nudity censorships and stuff like that, but that's not like a hindrance. So I've never really dealt with that sense. So I've been very fortunate. But also, obviously, the internet, in the end of the day, there is a kind of a disconnect to the establishment, quote unquote, that has a checkbox of what is acceptable and not acceptable, and then there's the real world. And my kids are in the real world with social media and could care less about what the establishment says and says not. So there's also like a whole sense of control versus uncontrollable, because if you want to see something, it's out there. And we got to remember that all these streaming services, algorithm, all this way that they function, the way they're presented, it all comes from porn. So, sin is very useful.
La ragazza di davanti.
Hello. So you said to look at your future, you need to look at the past to think about your future. And thank you for talking about the importance of restoration and protecting the legacy, because that is my job. I'm a restoration technician and specialist. So
Oh, wow,
thank you
great.
very much for bringing that up. It's not something that people tend to even know exists. We're very much sort of behind the scenes. And if you don't see what we've done, then it means we've done a good job.
Yeah.
In regards to that, for you, what place does 35mm film have in today's cinematic landscape for you?
Oh, wow. Well, I love digital, but I also, I guess, I love movies. I think this whole versus this and versus that it's more about what canvas is interesting and what do you want to portray as. At the end of the day, it will mostly be just seen on your iPhone. So if you start with where it's going to end up, I think is more productive than starting in like, I would like the world to be flat, but it doesn't really matter if everyone sees it as round. So I think technology, in a way, is more about what it can lead to, because we're very much dictated by the technology that we have access to. So the accessibility is really what's interesting, and obviously that's what some of these corporations have been able to control the world on, not by creating things, but by controlling the accessibility to material.
Signore qui davanti, poi dopo la ragazza.
Salve, sono Andrea Guglielmino di Cinecittà News. Dunque, film sul cannibalismo sono andati molto di moda per un certo periodo e poi li abbiamo abbandonati. Ne ha fatto uno Eli Roth, non so se l'ha visto e che cosa ne pensava, e secondo lei, non lo so, questo senso di avventura si è un po' perso adesso che abbiamo tutto a disposizione o meno? Grazie.
Well, I don't know how to answer that. I will say I think that there's an obsession with cannibalism or zombies or anything that it's about restarting, destroying the past or living in a society that's fallen and could therefore begin again is a very, very seductive part of our existence, because we all maybe miss something relatable that we can't feel. So the idea of an apocalyptic world almost gives us the ability to reimagine what would the world look like if I had the control, which is essentially like creating. So, the more zombies, the better.
Qua.
Me? Yeah, okay, cool. So the question is around the movie-going experience. Now we have multiple streaming services versus going to the cinema theater and viewing films on the big screen. So for you as a filmmaker, when you're directing a film, does it bother you personally whether your content is going to be consumed on a tablet or a smartphone or a laptop versus the box office numbers? Not necessarily the business part of it, but just the average Joe going to a cinema theater, buying a ticket at the box office and experiencing that product on the celluloid.
Well, I think that going to the cinema is like anything. It's the best experience, but that's like you don't watch a concert on your television as it's better than going to a live performance, or going to a museum is certainly more interesting than watching it on Google Earth. I think that we are, as human beings, and certainly the pandemic proved that at the end of the day, we need to belong together, and experiences are better suited when it's collective at the end of the day. But obviously with so many choices that have been given to us, it makes it harder to navigate and to focus on what is the best part. I don't think a movie being seen on a telephone is least better or least worse or than watching it on a screen. It's just another canvas. But it can be intimate, it can be interesting, at the same way you can watch something on a huge screen. So I don't think there's that difference. It's just more about how does it speak to you. But obviously there is a logical element to the effort you put into it. And the more effort we put into it, the more the reward is. It's a bit like having sex. The more you put into it, the more fun it is. And I think that the less we dismiss as just something we click or we swipe, the effort doesn't give it the same payoff. So it's really a personal choice that's just opened up to much more opportunities. So I think it's hard to say what is best, what is worse. Personally, I would always prefer the cinema. I think it's more fun. But, you know, we also have a responsibility, all of us, to go and see movies then. We can't just sit and complain. Then we have to spend the effort. And, you know, people are different.
C'è una ragazza lì con la camicia bianca.
I just have a question. I come from India, and this is the first time I'm in Venice Film Festival. I just have a question related to the fact that you addressed AI and our human race fighting with it and confronting the fight. In the festival, I am personally finding it very difficult to enter any theater just to watch a film showing my card, because every time the system is asking me to get into my telephone, like in the mobile phone, and access. This was not the culture in my country. So do you think if we focus on keeping both the options and trying to look at this, like addressing social isolation, because there are many people like us and old people like us who are not comfortable using technology to come to see a cinema, and maybe we can encourage them. I request you to speak a little on that, if the festival can help us.
Manya, you want to answer this one? I think like anything, the world turns very fast, and the faster it turns, the more confusing it can become. But at the end of the day, technology also makes it more interesting to navigate through sometimes. So I don't really, I would say that the obligation of anyone is always to remember that a human touch is more powerful than a click.
Yes. Yes, that's what I want or request the festival and filmmakers like you, if you can encourage us more.
Well, when I come back with a movie, I'll make sure that it's only
Thank you so
paper
much.
tickets, and if you don't have it, you're not going to get in.
Thank you.
Qui davanti.
Hi, Alberto. We started from Deodato, so I was wondering, do you follow contemporary Italian cinema, or are there any Italian directors you like? Thanks.
I don't really follow cinema as much anymore than I used to, but that's, you know, having family and children and a wife and all other normal things. I wish I could. I watch a lot of politics online. I find that very amusing. And your country is certainly very amusing to look at politically. Talk about a Deodato cannibal movie, you know. But I hope and that one day I'll be able to see more and just, you know, find the time to. There's what's his name's the Sulima Stefano. Yeah, I think he's a very good filmmaker.
Qui davanti ancora.
I have a question more about your process. My name is Moira. Hi. How has your process changed over the years? You know, you talk about you have a family and you know, your sort of time is limited. So I would love to talk a little bit about that. And then also, I love the fact that you talked about your interest in different kinds of storytelling. So from gaming and, you know, all that kind of stuff, even AR, you know, VR. Is that something that you're sort of also playing with? And how do you sort of talk to other filmmakers about thinking about technology, you know, when it comes to storytelling?
Well, I have I tried to work with the ChatGPT, and it was very difficult because it was very unresponsive. So it was I learned a lot of how right I was and how wrong it was. Because every time I would type in a concept, it would either come back as I cannot respond to that, or seek help, or call this hotline. And you're like, okay, great. Now, I know exactly what to do. I find gaming very fascinating. I don't know a lot about it. I have friends who are in that community, so it's interesting to hear. I've gone to some of the places where I'm in a game as a person, so that was interesting to see. But I find it very, very, I wish I could program. I just don't have the brain for it, I can barely, write a pencil. I think that anything that enhances creativity or becomes a canvas, and I think seeing how my kids use social media is obviously the same way that myself would use a video camera, or my parents would use a film camera back in the day, but they have just so much more abilities, and they're so curious, and they're so, in a way, much more advanced, because of their brains are just more advanced, I think, that they are quicker to navigate and to understand. And this whole nonsense, in my opinion, about, attention span and the audience is the problem is the wrong way of looking at it. The audience has no problem. We're the problem. We're just too slow or too uninteresting or too unpersonal to engage with, So it's the other way around. I think it's more look at what all the young people are doing, or older people for that matter, and being inspired by that is what makes us up every morning to go, I need still to create, and how do I create? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't know I was colorblind until I was 24. And it happened because I got a girlfriend. And yes, I got a girlfriend when I was 24. We all heard the story. I married her, and no, I had sex before, so we got that out of the way. I was buying her a pair of shoes, and she kept on putting them on. I was like, why is she putting on the same pair? And then I realized one was black, one was purple. And I couldn't tell the difference. So she said, oh my God, you're colorblind. And so I realized, my whole life, that's why I couldn't really see anything. Plus I needed glasses, which I didn't know either. So everything had been fuzzy my entire existence. And so colorblind is interesting because it's actually a way it can be perceived as a condition or a handicap to certain capacities. And there's technology that can help you now use that. But I've completely removed myself from that, and I said it was more of a gift from God because it made me use my brain in a different way. So now when I work on films, everyone around me has to be colorblind, because if I can't see it, then I can't talk about it. So now the whole crew is colorblind. But that means that they have to exercise certain parts of their brain that they usually wouldn't even contemplate or understand how to mix things, because that would not be the norm. If you're not colorblind, you wouldn't know the difference. So in that way, it's become like a strength. It's like, because creativity is very much about turning your weaknesses into your strengths. At the end of the day, there's nothing, perfection doesn't exist, it's a waste of time. But if you can take what you're not so good at and find a way to make it better by making it a part of yourself, or make it something that you prioritize more than anything else, it's the balance, and that's the exercise. And that both comes with hard work, luck, and God's talent.
Aspetta, c'è una domanda lì prima.
Buongiorno, mi chiamo Laura. Ok. Volevo chiederle, lei prima ci ha parlato di un consiglio appunto che le è stato dato quando lei ha chiesto come poter essere un buon filmmaker. Volevo chiederle adesso, in questo momento storico, qual è il suo consiglio che darebbe a un aspirante filmmaker?
If I had any advice to give any young filmmaker, I would say, don't listen to anyone. No one knows what they're talking about. Stop going to all these opinionated ideas of what film, if that's what you want to do, should be. Stay home, watch a lot of television, use your telephone, and just make films that you would like to see. Because that's the one thing that can never be taken away from you. At the end of the day, if you made your movie the way you wanted to make it, well, that can never be criticized. It may not like it, and I've certainly had my experience of people not liking it, but they can't say I didn't make it the way I wanted to. So it's like, it's like they can never knock you out, And so my advice would just be do it your way. And technology has always allowed you more abilities to do that than ever. And so the future is bright. And have kids, it's very inspiring.
Buongiorno, sono Livia Tripiciano per The Hot Corn e la mia domanda è: farebbe mai un remake, un reboot di un film di Deodato o di un altro regista di genere italiano? Grazie.
No. Why? It's not needed. No.
No.
Buonasera. Abbiamo parlato molto di tecnologia, stiamo parlando molto di tecnologia e abbiamo menzionato anche i videogiochi come forma di creatività con cui esprimere le proprie emozioni, utilizzare appunto i videogiochi come una tela bianca. Abbiamo parlato anche di tecnologia come game changer nel modo in cui comunichiamo l'arte all'audience, alle altre persone e io come altre persone sappiamo che lei come regista ha contatti anche con persone del mondo dei videogiochi come Hideo Kojima per esempio e io proprio per questo mi chiedevo, secondo lei i videogiochi possono essere o potranno essere considerati un game changer nel mondo della tecnologia e nel modo in cui comunichiamo l'arte? Possono sostituire il cinema o le due forme possono convivere? Grazie.
Well, you can say that one of the few canvases that continues to evolve is gaming because of technology. And, I have a very good friend called Hideo Kojima, who's a great game creator, and he's an artist. I can't say anything other than that, and he is a master of what he does, and he's a visionary and he's an auteur, if you want to use that. So of course gaming is as artistic as anything else, Look, nothing has ever been invented that's gone away, and nothing that ever been invented is better than another thing. Everything is great, and it's just which ones do you want to choose? What are you drawn towards? And the idea that it's all collecting and becoming the same thing, I don't really believe that. I think it's more about looking what each canvas can present and prioritize the differences rather than trying to make everything the same, because it always limits you, in my opinion,
Hi, I'm Hanson. I have a question about your writing process. I know you're saying you're like a very visual-oriented director. Would you say that your films come from you have the theme first and then you kind of create images around that, or you have images and you kind of build a story around it? I'm just kind of curious what comes first when you are writing your films, because some people start with the characters and other people the plot, but I don't know, you have a lot of like dreamlike, surreal, like symbolist images, so I'm very curious.
I start with a concept based on what would I like to see. And then I usually build it from then. And then I write everything on index cards for a long time, so I can move it around like a television click. And then I shoot in chronologically order. So I know that whatever I began as, it will certainly not end like that. So that's my, it's not, everyone has their own way, and there's no perfect way. And there was somebody who was asking about advice for a filmmaker. Also one thing, when they tell you that, you don't know how to make a movie or your script's wrong, they're lying, No one knows anything.
Ragazzo col cappello.
Hi, my name is Yaya from Egypt. I'm an actor, but I also studied computer science in my university. So I wanted to ask about something. Do you think there should be like an entity or an organization protecting from the abuse of the AI itself, or like the power of it, controlling it somehow or another, or just letting it full use free for everyone? And I'm talking in reference, like for example, what happened in the music industry with the AI songs and all of that things that got released. That's it. Thank you.
Well, it's a really, really interesting question, because it goes back to the inequality issue that we're also facing about how do we share wealth. We kind of come past a lot of our differences politically or, in terms of globally, how we're looking at things. But now it's about how do we exist together as a global species, because we're all global. We're in each other's bedrooms on social media, we are in everywhere. I think that there has to be some kind of political idea of what this thing is. An AI is an alien. We don't have to go to space to find it. We are creating an alien, and we don't know what that means or what it can do. So we have to be cautious. We have to be afraid, we have to be curious. But I think we have to take it in very small steps. But it's here to stay, and it's going to be very much embedded in everything we do. Can it create? I don't think so, but that's my opinion. Sure, it can duplicate, but maybe that says something about our industry. If it's so easy to duplicate, then obviously it's so meaningless. Why is it so hard to catch young people watching content or movies or television or music or literature? Well, maybe because if it's meaningless, why would they spend their time on it? I wouldn't spend my time on it, so why would I expect my kids to do that? Maybe it's us remembering that when we do create, some of the filmmakers here, that if you create from the heart, then that can never be duplicated. You can never take that away. And stop listening to all those stupid essays and people telling you what a movie shouldn't be or should is, or bad writing or good writing. It's a load of, who cares? My kids don't. They care about emotions. They care about being transformed. And the idea of length is exploded. People are watching, boxes being opened on YouTube for like 5 hours, or they're watching people sitting playing a video game, for like 15 hours, and think it's the most exciting thing ever. Everything is exploded. There are no rules. But as a human, we have to be very cautious of the alien and how that affects our lives, so it doesn't dominate, but it becomes a coexistence. And obviously, the music went through it very much, literature went through it very much with good and bad content. Now we're in cinema, but it's and probably the most scariest thing is information, because that's what we are so affected by, is how do we manipulate the mind? And obviously that's where this is a great tool. So yes, you have to be really cautious with it. It has a lot of responsibility to play God.
Purtroppo il tempo a nostra disposizione è finito. Grazie a tutti di essere intervenuti. Grazie Nicolas.
Thank you. See you tonight.
E vi aspettiamo stasera a mezzanotte alla Sala Giardini per la proiezione di Ultimo Mondo Cannibale. Grazie ancora.
We should say, one thing you should remember if you come tonight, there is this year's Venice before tonight, and then there's Venice after tonight. So if you want to be where, like, you went to saw the Sex Pistols the first time, this is tonight.